What's a silly detail in a book that ruined it for you? What innocuous and unimportant detail have you read in an otherwise decent book that just immediately turned you off from it, despite it having no real effect on the plot or characters? Mine is when I was reading The Assassin's Blade, and the main character makes note, more than once, of how a black asp is dangerous because it might be poisonous. Girl, are you planning on eating it? It's a stupid pet peeve, I know, and I wouldn't shit on the book over something so small. But for me personally, that one little word pretty much instantly changed how much I was enjoying the book. What are more inconsequential tidbits from books that just bothered people for no good reason? I've blocked the book from my mind, but there was one set in Regency or Victorian England where the author kept screwing up people's titles. Like there would be a guy named John Smith who was a duke, and she would call him Lord Smith and then Lord John and then Duke Smith or the Duke of Smith. And I was just, you have zero concept whatsoever of anything you are saying, and minimal research would have fixed this and go away. There. Ulmao Duke Smith. Earl Tyrone. Huh? The Earl of Tyrone is a real person. My name is Earl. TheRefedYouTube.com/watch Duke of Earl, Dennis. Never mind that Smith is a trade name, so it'd be pretty unlikely that a Smith would be a duke. No, you see, he makes and repairs dukes. He's a dukesmith. Duke Smith, the dukesmith. Lord John the Dukesmith, you mean? This was a wonderful image and an even more wonderful laugh. Thanks so much. And then there's Duke John Smith, the John Smith. This feels like a joke that belongs on Community. Would that this Reddit thread were a community Reddit thread. I've sometimes wondered what the ancestors of people named Kingsmith did. Is God a ducksmith, the creator of ducks? That and the Duke title is associated with the name of the duchy, not the person's name. Oh, I just finished The Light on Farallon Island, and the way the MC and her love interest talk is so damn far from mid-19th century conversation, it took me right out of it. And the way they acted and spent time alone with each other. You could argue that the MC is a social outlier, but you need to describe how or why, or the reader just ends up assuming you know nothing about social norms in the time period they're writing about. The Duke of Smith, my God, Mao. It is a truth universally acknowledged that bras with fat stacks must be in want of a wife. Heh, don't read Snow Crash by Stevenson. The lead character's name is Hero protagonist. Was it Outlander? There's a character they call Lord John Grey. His older brother Harold is a duke, and supposedly Lord is the correct title for the younger brother of a duke. But the older brother didn't want to be a duke and instead insisted that everyone call him by his next title, which was Earl Melton. But then people randomly address him, so the reader had to know that he could be referred to as Hal, Harold, the elder Grey, the Duke, Your Grace, my lord, Pardlow, or Melton. Not to be confused with his father, the Duke of Pardlow. Pretty sure there's some Sir in there somewhere, and the of is always optional. I had a relative who thought Lady Deedeye's brother's name was Earl Spencer. I tried for years to convince her otherwise. Oh God, that shit drives me crazy. It's not hard to find out how titles work. Another one that kills me is Sir John Smith being referred to as Sir Smith. No, Sir is always used with the first name. It's not a synonym for Mr. Sir John Smith is either Sir John Smith or Sir John, never Sir Smith. Duke of Earl. Possibly related to the Duke of Earl. Sounds like that scene from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Bill, I am the Earl of Preston, and I am the Duke of Ted. I just finished A Dreadful Splendor, and the author had both the narrator and other people who should have known better refer to the Earl of something as Mr. Pemberton. Consistently throughout the book, I kept hoping the plot would make up for the author's lack of knowledge, but it did not. Lord Smith, Lord John, Duke of Smith are all valid ways to formally introduce one, Lord Duke of or John Smith, Duke of the Duchy of Smith, probably antiquely Smythe, depending on the social and ladder of aristocracy below the king, or in Victorian Regency era Britain, Queen. Lord Smith, Lord John, Duke Smith, and Duke of Smith are all valid ways to formally introduce one Lord John Smith, Duke of the Duchy of Smith, probably antiquely spelled Smythe, depending on the social and ladder of aristocracy below the king, or in Victorian Regency era Britain, Queen. In Lee Bardugo's Grisha books, people are constantly getting drunk on kvass, which is a fermented beverage with about 0.5% alcohol, about as much as a non-alcoholic beer. It's just extremely silly and such an easily Googleable thing that I'm amazed it made it through the editing process, especially since it could easily have been changed with a find and replaced to some kind of vaguely Russian-y sounding fantasy beverage, and that would have been considerably less silly. Couldn't get through more than 2 chapters of her books because of the quasi-Russianification. Like no one of any Slavic decent read or edited your book? Not a single one? To fix all the terrible glaring errors? Couldn't get through more than 2 chapters of her books because of the quasi-Russianification. Interestingly enough, I have a Russian friend who goes by Grisha, and who informed me that it is a nickname for Greg, Gregor, Gregory, etc. So seeing those books, I was like, it's an entire series about Greg. No thanks. What if it was about old Greg? Ever drunk Baileys from a shoe? I hear he does watercolors. Actually, that part is legit. In the deep lore later in the series, it is revealed the first Grisha was called Gregor, hence the term. I can't help but wonder if that was a sort of retcon. Still stupid. In Russian, a profession wouldn't be called by a person's name, and shirt one at that. It's like nails on chalkboard. It was intentional, though, not a mistake on the author's part. LB used kvass because it was way less familiar to the average American than the term vodka. She thought reading about vodka in a fantasy novel would take readers out of the story. But agree, she should have just made up a word. She did write a mea culpa apologizing for playing fast and loose with Russian culture/language. I didn't think it was unintentional, just silly. They're fun enough books, though, and I enjoyed the Netflix show. Watka. I have a similar issue with fanfics where I assume the author is too young to have spent time around drunk people or to have gotten drunk themselves, or they might just not want to. The issue is that they tend to go one of 2 ways. Either the characters have half a beer and become noticeably drunk, like cannot think straight drunk, or they down a bottle of vodka in one go and get just a slight buzz. It isn't usually enough to take me out of, but I do find it funny. Another issue, with the author not understanding how taverns work and think it's like a modern-day cafe or bar. There was this medieval fantasy series where the MC orders coffee at a tavern, and when the keeper says no beer, and the MC says not before 10 in the morning, a coffee thank you. Also another medieval fantasy book where the main characters open a new cafe in a medieval town, and the townspeople are surprised at the concept of a cafe where you can just hang out. Like medieval people never had any common spaces to hang out in before the invention of cafes. Or another one where they go to a medieval tavern in an isolated village in the woods, and the tavern gives them a menu booklet, and they order like they are in a modern-day restaurant, asking which drink pairs with which food. The townspeople are surprised at the concept of a cafe where you can just hang out. Like medieval people never had any common spaces to hang out in before the invention of cafes. I mean, hell, that's exactly what taverns, inns, and the like were. Half the point was that they provided a common area where people just gathered up and talked and drank and whatnot. She also names one of the characters Privyet. She named one of the characters Hi, and I'm still not over it. If you don't drink alcohol much, you can totally get drunk on kvass. Maybe getting wasted is more difficult, but I do get buzzed from it. as well as the Ukrainian family I drink it with since it's usually on special occasions. If you make it yourself, you can probably up the alcohol content too. I've never read the book though, so I'd say if they treat it like whiskey, lol. IRC, it's usually around 1.5%, but can get up to 3%. I used to drink a ton of kvass as a kid and never experienced this interestingly. Maybe I was just drinking bad kvass? Probably just lower proof than kind of sketchy jugs. LMAO, they do make it different strengths to be basically none or a noticeable percent. Oh, yikes. Seriously? I've only watched the TV adaptation, and even then, the Russian butt to the left culture had its silly moments. If I'd read that in the books themselves, I would have probably cracked up. Might as well write that they were getting hammered on kombucha. Knowing anything about Russian culture and language makes these books unreadable. It's like the author didn't even make the effort to Google these things. I can't believe so many ridiculous things like that made it through the editorial process, but the kvass was the thing that broke me. Plot twist, maybe they were chugging by the barrel. I saw her addressing this somewhere in an interview or something. She just said, in her world it has a much higher alcohol content and is treated more like vodka. I've been waiting for this question. A John Grisham character getting a bagel at Café du Monde in New Orleans. They only serve beignets, and those are nothing like bagels. If he'd wanted to use an alternate item because he thought beignet was too foreign a term, he could have chosen better. Powdered sugar donut would be less egregious. There's no excuse for that mistake. Grisham should have known it was a beignet. That's got to be one of the top 5 things everyone knows about Nola. How about this? Grisham wrote the book by dictating it into his phone, and the phone thought he said bagel after it heard the word cafe. Yeah, been to New Orleans a couple times. It's kind of a big tourist thing there. Messing that up would be like ordering a grilled cheese sandwich from McDonald's. Lee Child once had Jack Reacher get a cheeseburger at breakfast at McDonald's. Now they do all-day breakfast, but when they didn't, there was no chance in hell of you getting your hands on a cheeseburger for breakfast. I was once in a McDonald's at 10:29, and she told me that the Egg McMuffins were no longer available because it was changeover time, even though I could literally see a line of them. They were going to throw them out. Still couldn't have one. McDonald's doesn't fuck around with deadlines. And Lee Child has never eaten at McDonald's. Edit. Timex to time. Does anyone else hate the way that autocorrect changes ordinary words to brand names? Listen, if anyone can get McDonald's to serve a cheeseburger before 10:30, it's Jack Reacher. Jack, how'd you get a McDonald's cheeseburger for breakfast? The griddle flashback to Jack holding a McDonald's employee's head on the hot griddle. I don't know, man. It took him a whole season of TV to get a slice of pie. Reacher said nothing. The cheeseburger did all the talking. For real, what are they going to do, say no to the 6'5" ex-military hobo? I mean, he wouldn't hurt a fly unless provoked, but they don't know that. I can totally see some acne-faced high school McDonald's employee start to tell him they don't serve burgers this early, stop and catch himself, then make the mountain of a man a damn cheeseburger as quickly as possible, while terrified, lol. Trivia level pulp fiction. During my senior year of high school, I had 4th period off and would go to Burger King for late breakfast every day. One day I was a bit later than usual, and the cashier had saved my breakfast order for me through the changeover to the lunch menu. The guy in line behind me then tried to order what I had just gotten and was apoplectic when he was told he had to order lunch. Whoa. I'm fairly sure if you tried that at McDonald's, your manager would have you flogged. I remember in the mid-90s, BK started offering their full menu all day. My go-to hangover food when I had to open retail, so usually 9 a.m., was a Whopper. Edit. Timex to time. Does anyone else hate the way that autocorrect changes ordinary words to brand names? Oh, you know I Mountain Dew. I did Pepsi that coming. Man, your McDonald's sucked then. I used to show up at 10:35-ish and order from both menus. A hash brown in the center of a McDouble is really a magical thing. McDonald's all over the world. I don't get up early, and I don't like anything but the breakfast, so I have a surprising amount of experience fronting up at McDonald's in different countries at just about 10:30 a.m. Very weird. I would actively go to McDonald's at that time just for the hash brown McDoubles. Never had them turn me down. My mind autocorrected bagel to beignet until I read the rest of your post. That's how nonsensical it is. The intrepid young lawyer stopped by Café du Monde for a bowl of ramen and a steaming hot glass of gin before heading to the courtroom. It was a hot July day, but he got himself a big slice of king cake and gumbo with extra raisins. This didn't ruin the book, but pulled me out completely and made me reassess everything I'd read. I was a teenager living in Northern Ireland and reading It by Stephen King, which is set in Derry, and I assumed that meant the Derry in Northern Ireland. Bangor and Castle Rock are also mentioned in the book. Again, these are places in Northern Ireland. At some point, someone talks about something like driving north from Castle Rock to Bangor, and I thought, wait, TF, Castle Rock's on the north coast, Bangor's south of it? Laughed about it to a parent, and suddenly found out I had been picturing the book taking place in the wrong country and continent. I had a similar issue when I read Bridge to Terabithia as a kid. I'm on the West Coast, so when they talked about Washington, I assumed they meant Washington State, not D.C. When they said they drove south to Washington, my brain was just, what the hell is going on? And I stopped reading it. I had this with Book of M, wondering how they were getting from Washington, D.C. to Arlington, Texas so quickly. I forgot there was an Arlington right there. I lived in Washington State as a kid. When I was reading Little House on the Prairie and Pa was talking about the government in Washington, I thought that was a strange place to have the federal government all the way across the county from most of the population. They could have been in B.C., maybe. Bless. If you stopped there, you were saved just in time from childhood trauma. Thought Beartown was in Alaska. It's in Sweden. I listened to podcasts and read the summary before I read the book, and somehow didn't realize until recently, making the halfway point. Same, except I thought it took place somewhere in the Midwest. Why do they keep referencing Krona? Is this some American slang I'm not aware of? That's why I started to question it too. Haha, I was like, is currency in Alaska different? Ulmau, I feel seen and I feel heard. That's hilarious and awesome. I guess Maine had a lot of Irish settlers. Yes, but then a lot of them got driven out. Jim Gaffigan, the comic, is descended from Irish who were living in Maine and had even built a church there, who got burned out and then run out of the state when the anti-Irish sentiment flared up after the famine. His people ended up in Ohio. I read the first two lines very quickly and thought you were going to say he descended down into Maine and drove out all the Irish. St. Patrick with the snakes. I like the image. There's a reason we call that region New England, and it ain't 'cause they were creative with the names. I have just cringed on behalf of all Irish people everywhere, and I'm not even Irish. I think Ireland just declared war on this guy. At the time we started calling it New England, Ireland was part of England. Ireland was colonized starting in the 16th century and didn't succeed at shaking England off until the early 20th. The region of the U.S. was named New England in the early 17th century, and most of the towns that borrow Old World names were established through the 19th century. So, historically, it checks out. Ireland has never been part of England. At that time, it was the Kingdom of Ireland, and while ruled by the English-British monarchs, it was a separate state, albeit a client one. This didn't change until 1801 when it was unified with the United Kingdom of Great Britain to become the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. And of course, the rest is very messy history. Yes, these will be the reasons that Irish place names are found throughout New England. But we have to call out conflation of the two countries, which is what I was doing, if flippantly, because they are not one and the same by any stretch of the imagination. You might consider it semantics, but there's a whole island of people who bear a very bloody and tragic history, who very much do not consider it so. To call Ireland a part of England, historically, absolutely does not check out. Ireland has never been part of England. If you're going to make that extremely technical claim, you're also going to have to acknowledge that it's still false because Ireland was part of the Commonwealth of England following Cromwell's conquest. In what way is it a technical claim? I'm not going to profess to being an expert by any means, but a quick Google search can show that the Commonwealth of England was a political structure that isn't synonymous with England, the country. Isn't synonymous with England, the country. Who said anything about England, the country? The context of the statement that Ireland was part of England is clearly referring to England, the state, which the Commonwealth of England absolutely was. This whole thread has been about England, the country as we recognize it today, and which importantly still exists, and which Ireland has never been a part of. Ireland has never been part of England. It was, and still partially is, part of the United Kingdom. Bangor, Derry, and Castle Rock are all in Northern Ireland, not in England. I was making a joke that the names are so unoriginal that the region doesn't even have an original name, not saying that the original ones were in England. We'll let you off with a warning this time. I'll include an explainer for my joke next time. The land of the boroughs, west, south, north, and marl. Funnily enough, Ireland isn't in England. As I said to others, making a joke that the region has so many unoriginal names that the name of the region is unoriginal. It hurts that 134 people liked this comment, lack of maps, education, or both. I was making a joke that the names are so unoriginal that the region doesn't even have an original name, not saying that the original ones were in England. We have a surprising number of places here in New England that are named after places in Old England or Ireland. Edit. Because somehow it wasn't obvious, is it really surprising though? It is called New England after all. It's a little surprising how Irish it is. Had to explain to some American mates on a drive through New Hampshire why a sign saying, Derry, Londonderry, turned me into a giggling mess. As an American, I only get it due to mwikipedia.org/wikiderrygirls this. I kept getting clips from the show Letterkenny on YouTube and thought that's a really weird accent for Donegal. Guess Donegal accent would be harder to understand? The antics totally fit, so I just, new Irish show. Letterkenny is a Canadian TV show set in a fictional town in Canada. None of the clips saw had deep snow, which, again, Donegal, which is like the most likely place to get deep snow in Ireland. Off topic, did you watch Derry Girls? One of my faves on Netflix. Love Derry Girls. I'm not from Northern Ireland, but I'm a 90s girl. I cried like a baby watching the finale. It was such a good show. I learned a lot, too. I didn't know all about what y'all went through. Lol, same exact experience. Couldn't believe SK wrote a book set in NI, then quickly realized. I did similar with a short story set in Perth. That's actually kind of cool and exemplifies why books can never be replaced by any other medium. You successfully created and sustained an imagined environment totally different than the author intended, all because of 3 shared words. That's magical. However, in 11/22/63 and The Outsider, the geography and weather of Texas were both so egregiously wrong that it totally took me out of the story. For example, I think someone was chilly outside at night, so they had to wear a coat. In August. No, those ones were set in Texas, Ireland. Oh my! To make it even funnier, Derry isn't even a real place. Maine is absolutely full of place names from other countries. You can drive from Belgrade to China in 20 minutes, Calais, which we pronounce as Calais, to Peru, Poland to Belfast, etc. It seems like every other town here is named for someplace else. In Where the Crawdads Sing, the fact that everyone went to Asheville for an errand when it is so far from the coast of North Carolina. Did they even look at a map of the state? I was just coming here to say that. Without interstate highways at that time, it would have been an 8-10-hour drive. And with bigger cities in between. What is it about NC geography that causes books and TV shows to struggle so? Lol, this seems to just happen so much. I remember people talking about it when Outer Banks did it, never seen it, and some references in Outlander come to mind. It would take days, maybe a week or more, to travel to the Blue Ridge from Wilmington on foot or by horse, and they seem to do it in a day or so. Oh God, ditto for Louisiana. Any and all Louisiana happen right next to a swamp. Doesn't matter where in the state you actually are. Gah. Give credit where credit is due. Puccini sat the last scene of his opera Manon Lescaut in the desert right outside New Orleans. Hey, it's a change, right? Don't know what liberties the TV Outlander may have taken, but I'll give a nod to author Gabaldon for the depths of research that go into her books, historically, geographically, and technically. The main books, there are sidetrack books as well, take years to write and involve tremendous research and travel. Do you know off the top of your head if this particular journey is mentioned in the books? I've not seen the whole show, but I've also never read the books. I know her to be a well-researched author, and I was impressed by some of the other historic details I saw captured in the bits of the show I have seen. I'm from southern Appalachia, specifically this area of NC that's highlighted in later seasons, and it was cool to see it represented. I just remember it seeming to not take long to get there from Wilmington, and you wouldn't be able to by boat. That made me laugh. It just seems to happen a lot with NC geography. I do a showbook read-along list, which was way more straightforward in earlier seasons and has just gotten all over the map. But I'm like 400-plus pages into the fourth book, and I'm not even through what's covered in the first 4 episodes. The Outer Banks show had so many things wrong with it. They took a boat to somewhere that should take them like 4 days, and they did it in a day. They often yell, "Quick! Hide!" and then proceed to hide behind something that couldn't possibly keep a perp from seeing them, and they'll sit there with their heads poking out from around it so they can see what's going on, as they continue to talk loud enough for a perp to find them. It's 'cause North Carolina is fucking huge, and you don't really understand it looking at a map. You feel it when you drive it, though. As a kid, we road-tripped from Miami to D.C., Florida, 8 hours, zzz, Georgia, an hour and a half, easy. South Carolina, less than an hour. North Carolina, 4 hours. Wait, what? And that's south to north. If you drove from Murphy, one of the farthest towns in the west, to Ocracoke Island in the east, it would take nearly 10 hours. I remember people talking about it when Outer Banks did it. Never seen it. The TV show is filmed in South Carolina for tax financial reasons, I am sure. The terrain is completely different. One of the other main differences is there are 7 highly distinct lighthouses in the Outer Banks. The ones they film in SC are also highly distinct, and they aren't the same. Prior to its 2020 debut, the show moved production to South Carolina reportedly in response to North Carolina's widely protested 2016 House Bill 2 legislation, which would have required transgender people to use the bathroom according to the sex they were assigned at birth. though parts of the bill, also known as the Public Facilities Privacy and Security Act, were later repealed. LGBTQ+ organizations continue to fight for trans rights throughout the state. In Outer Banks, when they took a ferry to Chapel Hill, that's at least 3 hours away. Everything took me out of that book, lol. My God! This is the one that came to mind when I saw this post. That drove me crazy. Have not read the book, also. The author is sus as hell, but that inconsistency enrages me. This is the one I was thinking of. The family is so poor that the one dress a year she buys is 4 tanks of gas away. I'm reading that book right now and just looked to see where Asheville is located. Good God, it's the opposite freaking side of the state, almost couldn't be farther from the coast. The MC and love interest were both children of musicians. MC's name was Melody, which, okay, is a little on the nose, but it's a legit name. Love interest's name? Rhythm? I just could not take it seriously. I know a rhythm and have seen a couple in the wild, but the idea of 2 people with complementary names and the same backstory is eye-rolly. It's like all those movies where a character's computer password is a detail they've mentioned in conversation instead of something their employer randomly assigned them 3 jobs ago that stuck. I spent over a decade working with eyes, and I wouldn't name my kid Cornea. Iris is a pretty name, though. That's fair. This may be apocryphal because I can't remember if the doctor I worked with was talking about someone she saw directly or just heard about, but she did tell me about a newborn named Retina, pronounced to rhyme with Christina. Named in honor of her deceased older sister Tina. This time, they'll do better. Oof. Untina'd in the womb. Rod would work. His poor twin Conor, though. I spent over a decade working with eyes, and I wouldn't name my kid Cornea. Retina, on the other hand. Whoops, commented on the wrong post, but one of the opthos I worked for did in fact tell me about a newborn Retina, pronounced to rhyme with Christina. I spent over a decade working with eyes, and I wouldn't name my kid Cornea. To be fair, that would indeed sound like a cornea joke. I actually saw an optometrist when I was in my teens whose first name was Cornea, not from an English first language background, but English-speaking me and my mother found it hilarious. I know someone who has children named Lyric and Melody. They are not a musician. My husband wanted to name our daughter Aria. I vetoed based on the fact that neither of us can sing our way out of a wet paper bag. I know an Aria and never really thought of it that way. It's a pretty name. And here, my nerd butt was thinking Arya T-Loke from Mass Effect. My dog is named Lyric. I love it as a dog name. I am not a musician either. Why not? I'm calling my kids Spreadsheet and XLOOKUP, Pivot and Macro, Excel, Word, and PowerPoint, with the unfortunate nickname of PP. What about little Bobby Tables? Serious question. How does one pronounce XLOOKUP? EX-lookup? CLOOKUP? Serious answer. I say it the first way. I remember reading the selection, and the MC's name is America Singer. You'll never guess what she's good at. Sewing? Sailing? You made me laugh out loud. A model citizen, good at America. America. What nationality was she? That makes sense in universe, though. Gregory Ilea wiped out most surnames in favor of the stupid makers and takers version of castes. America is a 5, the caste of artists and musicians. Aspen is a 6, the caste of clerical workers, and his last name is Legger. Elise is a 4, the caste of fancy chefs, and her last name is Whisks. There are quite a few weaknesses about the series, but a musician with a musical name makes some kind of sense. It just sounds so corny and made me roll my eyes. getting herself slightly, never severely burnt. She's a Russian dancer? If I was going to name a character something like singer, rhythm, or melody, I would make certain they had no musical ability at all. They'd sing like a yowling cat and fall over when they tried to dance. In Wreck the Halls by Tessa Bailey, the two main characters were named Melody and Beat. Both were also children of musicians. This book was such mindless trash, I loved it. One of my favorite Discworld gags is the Carter family, who understood one should name their daughters after virtues, and so they did. But then they got a little confused and believed if that was the case, one must also name their sons after vices. Hence, jealousy, deviousness, bestiality, covetousness, anger, and catastrophe, Carter. Fortunately for the brothers, nominative determination did not step in low. Alternative idea. Love interest's name is Tim, only to find out at the end of the book it's short for tempo. Tim Panny. Wait, so did melody and rhythm end up together? Yes, they did, but as a throuple with harmony, you can catch it on Lifetime. Now you're just making it up. Wait, are you talking about Wreck the Halls by Tessa Bailey? The FMC is melody and the MMC is beat. Is there another book where the MC has similar parentage and names? That was it. Yes, beat is even worse, IMO. I once babysat for two accountants. I swear to God, they named their daughter Equity, as in, they were creating equity. That poor girl. Rhythm? Surely rhythm? Rhythm is a dancer. Okay, but that book actually was pretty good. Which book was it? Oh, I thought it was Wreck the Halls by Tessa Bailey, but the MMC in that was actually called Beat, not Rhythm, so it may be a different book entirely. I know a hilarious amount of theater professors with Shakespearean names for their kids. I'm cackling at the thought that those kids might meet up and start dating. Tried to read a book once where the characters were named Lou and Reed. I am beginning to write a fantasy novel. I write fan fiction as a hobby and read a popular romantasy novel for the first time in decades that drove me crazy enough to try my hand at it. But man, I want to stress test some of the names I've come up with to avoid this sort of thing. That would absolutely come across as contrived and cringe to me. I was up until 4 a.m. writing a 3-act outline that's currently 7 pages, 4,000 plus words, and I'm so afraid of falling into dumb traps without someone to bounce ideas off of. Sigh. Pull the nice-sounding names out of film credits, off phone books, etc. Then you have plausible deniability because at least one person has that name, and that makes it real. If you want to bounce ideas off a complete stranger whose only interaction with you so far is this comment, I'm here for you. I used to do it for an old buddy of mine back in the day, also a fantasy writer, but he fell into addiction, so nothing we batted around really went anywhere, and it didn't help that I had moved 1,000 miles away and couldn't really do much to help keep him from falling off the wagon from so far. I'm so sorry to hear. I hope he's in a better spot, or gets to one these days. But I'd be happy to drop a line. It's just hard to keep it terribly brief, considering how much this brain weasel has taken the wheel. The basic gist is that it's got some reimagined elements of a fairy tale that I don't really see done ever, but that has a ton of angsty potential, Swan Lake. The main character has issues with memory and was orphaned, so has no actual idea who or what she is. Magic and immortals and gods are the thing of legend, though the veil separating those elements seems to be failing. It will fall to her to figure out how her lineage fits into what's happening, and what she decides to do about it once she knows. Curses, assassins, mythical monsters, magic, vengeful, conquering gods, and enemies to lovers love triangles, oh my. Color me intrigued. I'm imagining the cover art already.